Every year we get players who come out of nowhere and have a fast start to the season. But what happens when those hot starters start to cool down? Let's look at some of the most surprising players from April and decide, do you hold on or is it time to cut bait? Let's start out in Philadelphia, where ironically, just as they get their best player back, then some of their other players start to falter. We had some hot starts from guys like Brandon Marsh, who got a ton of playing time because Bryce Harper was out. Rhys Hoskins also out for the season. Marsh came over from the Angels, remember late last year, didn't do a whole lot. And so this year, we didn't really expect much from him. And so he was, of course, one of the hottest hitters in baseball for the first couple of weeks. Was hitting well over 300, still is over the 300 mark despite his recent slump. He scored 19 runs in the season, showing a little bit of power, and was hitting on top of that Philadelphia batting order. And so this looked like a great pickup, somebody that you could just slot in there in your maybe third, fourth outfielder spot and forget about. But like I said, as soon as Harper comes back, it's like everybody else kind of settled back in and, waiting for him to do the heavy lifting. Guys were stepping up to fill his spot. But since he's come back, I don't know, it's just like a different Phillies team. If you look at Marsh specifically, since the calendar turned to May, no home runs, no RBIs, only 1 run scored. Batting .235 over the past week, and he's moved down now to 8th in the lineup. One of the things I talked about a couple of weeks ago when I was saying this is a guy you need to look out for and maybe start picking up is the fact that he cut down on his strikeout rate quite a bit. But we've seen that now start to slowly creep back up. It's almost to 30% again. Last year he was one of the worst in terms of striking out, and it looks like those old issues are coming back. Despite the fact he's got a really good batting average still, he's got an expected batting average only in the 32nd percentile, so maybe some regression is also headed his way. So here comes the dilemma, which is going to be present for basically all the guys I'm going to talk about in this video, and that is, what do you do? The numbers look good in terms of totals, but a lot of that came before last week. What have you done for me lately? Not a lot. So if this guy's going to come plummeting back to earth, do you want him in your lineup when that happens? No, you don't. But do you just cut him outright and then risk maybe that he does come back and start hitting again? In a perfect world, you can trade him. That way you're getting what is almost near peak value for him, because realistically, is this a guy that we expect to have a full-blown breakout season? The appeal here really is if he's hitting his batting average. If he's got a favorable lineup spot, maybe runs and some RBIs. But now it looks like you're just hoping for batting average, and that's about it. There's not a ton of power here in this bat. He's not really a base stealer. So I would say try to flip him for whatever you can get for him. And if you can't, then, well, just keep him as a bench piece if you can afford to. And then another Philly that I'm starting to get worried about is Bryson Stott. Now, this was a high-end prospect of theirs, someone who we really had some hopes for this year if he could hold down that shortstop job and just get the bat going, which he did not do at all last year. Well, he got off to almost as good a start as you can hope for, hit .319 in the month of April. But the downside to that is it was a little bit of a hollow profile for fantasy, a little Luis Arias-like, and you think, well, that's a good thing, but it's only good insofar as it helps you in exactly one category, and that's batting average. Elite batting average is great, but if you're not giving any power, any speed, and not enough in terms of counting stats overall, I mean, really, this is a guy who's probably a little bit overvalued. And there really isn't much here in terms of power. He's got 2 home runs so far, really low barrel rate, 35.9% hard hit rate. Not too encouraging. A lot of soft line drives and singles, and just not a ton here to really look forward to if the batting average isn't present. And right now, in the month of May, like his teammate Marsh, not doing too well, only hitting 150. Now, I'll tell you personally, I sold high on Stott 2 weeks ago. He was still hitting really well at that time. Philly offense was rolling, but I knew that was probably the best that he was going to offer, so I was able to trade him for a starting pitcher. Now, don't say he's a must sell, because I think he'll be okay in terms of getting a little bit of everything, and I think the batting average will turn out fine, but I do think that I want to take advantage of, if there is a market for him, try to flip him. And if not, again, I would look at him really more as not your necessarily season-long solution, especially at the shortstop position. I would say might be a middle infielder utility guy on your bench. Man, I don't know if I can rely on him to provide the goods in terms of shortstop all year long. And now to the Reds. Let's talk about a pair of pitchers here who were looking great and now not so much. So how worried should we be specifically about Graham Ashcraft? He got to be a little bit of a trendy sleeper late in draft season, and man, he looked like he was crushing it. After his first 6 starts, had a cool ERA of 2.00 and a 1.17 whip. And then it all went up in smoke after 1 start. You know how sometimes a pitcher can have that one game that makes his entire season worth of progress go away, just destroy not only his, but your ERA in one game. Well, that happened to Ashcraft. 3.82 ERA now, almost doubled overnight. And just to add injury to insult, he also left the game a little bit early because he had a ball ricochet off his leg. But he's fine. Although, is he fine? That's what we have to worry now. Was this just a bunch of smoke and mirrors? Is this a guy who was just overachieving and now he's been exposed? Are we going to see him hit hard again? Or was this just one blip on the radar, an outlier? Don't overreact to it. As usual, the answer lies somewhere in between. Now, Ashcraft was getting buzz for a reason. He's got really good command. He generates a ton of grounders. He's got great velocity, although he isn't necessarily a high strikeout kind of pitcher. But you know that he also has a downside, and that's number 1, he pitches in Cincinnati, which is not good, except the fact that he's a ground ball pitcher, so he's been able to avoid giving up the long ball. Only 2 home runs allowed so far, and that's a good thing. And this last start wasn't a result of giving up a bunch of dingers. He just got hit hard. But we did see this coming, or at least I could say I know I did, because he's somebody I was definitely worried about, saying you should have sold high on him. His expected batting average only in the 40th percentile, and so he was definitely getting a little bit of luck. You know, that will happen with the ground ball pitchers, right? They rely on their defense and some good batted ball luck at times. But also, again, he's just not generating enough whips for me to feel like this kind of success to that level is sustainable. And so to some extent, I would say, yeah, that was just one bad start. He's not going to be terrible the rest of the season because of this. But he also is not going to be as good as he was early on. Not going to say I'm panicked about him. I'm just going to say welcome back to reality. And so if you have Ashcraft, yeah, keep rolling him out there and see what happens. And then maybe see if you can get some feelers for somebody who wants to buy on him, because this is definitely not the time to try to trade him away. And then I'm quickly going to go back to Nick Lodolo, his teammate in Cincinnati, because I just talked about him in a different video. His story is a little different than Ashcraft in the sense that he's had 2 halves of April that one was really good and the other was completely miserable. In his first 3 starts of the season, 2.12 ERA, only gave up 1 home run. In his last 4 starts, given up a total of 9 home runs, and that ERA is up to 6.29 with a 1.75 whip. What makes it hard for me to just give up on Lodolo and outright drop him, as ugly those numbers are, is, man, those strikeouts are just so tempting. He's got 47 on the year. That makes him top 20 in the majors. Now, you'd think the home run issue might be something that is going to be tricky to fix, because I already said he's, pitching in Cincinnati. Great American ballpark, definitely a hitter's venue. But at some point, the benefit you get from the strikeouts does not outweigh the ERA and the whip just being completely torn apart. I'm definitely benching Lodolo until he figures this home run problem out, and I'm okay if you cut him if you don't really need him, you don't need those strikeouts, or if you just want to preserve your ratios, I understand that. But with young pitchers, it's just how things go, the ups and the downs. You never know when they're going to come. That brings me to another pitcher, guy I was super high on in the preseason. That's Grayson Rodriguez, the Baltimore Orioles. So he had pitched 5 scoreless in 2 straight starts, was looking good, settling down after a rough couple of starts, and then went and got lit up also, gave up 6 earned runs in just 3 2/3 innings with 3 home runs. So also, just like Lodolo, Rodriguez, 29.9% K rate, but man, the ERA and the whip were just ugly. He actually just finished facing Tampa Bay, which is definitely a team you got to worry about. And he did okay. 5 2/3 innings, only gave up 2 runs. Problem is, both those runs came on home runs of the solo variety. So it looks like that home run problem, like Lodolo, is now present. So I'm going to go ahead and say the same thing. This is a guy who's very talented. He's striking batters out. But, man, if he's going to continue to have outings like this, it might do more harm than good. So I'm benching for now. I'm not dropping if I can afford it, but I don't blame you if you do. And if you want to look for a whole team, that is all of a sudden just going downhill fast. It's the St. Louis Cardinals, especially on offense. Remember, first week of the season, everyone was all excited. Jordan Walker made the team. He's hitting. Nolan Gorman now is slugging. This looks like the best lineup in baseball. Well, Walker is now in the minors. Gorman is still in the lineup most days, but he's starting to scuffle just a bit. This is a classic case where the season-long totals and the StatCast line looks really good, but if you look at just the recent sample, and there's something called rolling windows, where you take a subsection of time, a certain sample size, for the example here, 50 plate appearances. How's he doing these past 50 compared to the previous 50? Not too good. When you have a steady downhill climb, that's a bad sign. His average, which was in the 300s early on, now down to 259. So I'm talking about Gorman, and he's been struggling. But tonight, he did hit a home run. Still, this is somebody who overall, the way he approaches things, the whiff rate is not good. He is a slugger. He has some holes in his swing. He'll strike out. He's prone to slumps, and that's what he's doing. And really, as far as how he started the season, was a little bit over his head. I'll say in general, Gorman's a guy who's probably going to start getting cut, here and there from fantasy teams, and I'm okay with this. I'm not going to say I'm even worried about him because I didn't expect him to necessarily do too much other than have some hot streaks here and there. Just so happened his hot streak this year was the very beginning of the season, which reminds me a lot of another slugger who I said you should sell high as soon as you can. I hope you did if you had him. Patrick Wisdom, the Chicago Cubs. Long story short, he was hitting a lot of home runs, but hardly any RBIs, and the batting average was okay, I guess. But again, this was him on a hot streak, and in the past 2 weeks he's hit 2 home runs with 3 RBIs, and the average is now down to 236, which is basically par for the course for him. I said it 2 weeks ago, the power surge, it's about to end. Everything else is going to go with it, so trade him for whatever you can get if you have him. And if you don't get suckered into buying him from somebody else. And then finally, I have to address this, but there's some people who seem to believe that Joey Gallo still has some value in fantasy baseball. Joey Gallo did exactly what he does. He had a week where he hit a couple home runs, most of them solo shots, still struck out a ton, still not getting on base otherwise. So his batting average is now down, or for him, I guess I could say up, to 186. And you know what? Even the power, he's not having some sort of revival here. His hard hit rate is 28.6%, which would be the worst of his career since he became a full-time player. He is not even playing against left-handers, nor should he. It's time to get him off your roster if he's on there. If you're clearing any of these guys off your roster, you want to know who to pick up in their place, check out my latest waiver wire video.